The objective of this trip was to allow a group of Republican-minded people from County Fermanagh to interact and to meet with the Presbyterian community in County Antrim.
So we've taken a group of Republicans from various different backgrounds. We actually looked at where the United Irishmen had formed. We visited the battle sites. We had an introduction into the context of what the forces were that were bringing the United Irishmen from a reformist organisation initially, which sought minor reforms, and then it allied itself with Catholic emancipation, and finally it saw that it needed to, having been influenced by the international force of the American and French revolutions and republicanism, realised that this is where it sat, and that the only recourse for people seeking equality in society was to cut their links with Britain.
It's a very interesting history of the Presbyterians in the north of Ireland. You know,
the role of Presbyterians in the past was so important.
The United Irishmen did manage to bring every different kind of class and every different kind of religion together to fight for a common cause. It was lovely to see the beliefs that those men had then.
Because a lot of our history has been lost. We learn stuff today that you're not going to be taught in school. But, you know, these things have just been, history has just been lost completely.
And there was this sense of, come in historically, but let's go into the contemporary. So that it's not just a conversation about a people who lived 200 years ago, but a people who are very much part of the community today.
There's a real necessity here in this northern part of Ireland for people to sit and talk and exchange ideas. It's essential if we're to have a peaceful negotiation of the future. And in order to do so, we have to know each other, we have to understand each other, we have to respect each other and appreciate each other's backgrounds and cultures.
There was great interest in the Presbyterian form of church government. This proto-republican sense that they voted for their clergy, that they elected their elders, that they had complete control of their form of worship, and how you could even see that transfer from a religious sense into a political. That encouraged lots of more questions, and in dialogue and in meetings with Presbyterians, the feedback that I was getting from the Republican group was, we want to know more about these people, their background, what makes them, what shapes them, what's their influences. And the only way to do that, I think, was to take a trip into the Presbyterian heartland of County Antrim, and not just visit the entrance sites, as I would call it, things like 1798, which had become almost mythical in the sense of republicanism, and it's part of Presbyterian history, and it's a good entry point, but progressing from that and getting on to basically where Presbyterians are today and go on that journey with them, so that Republicans can sit down, have that conversation, and have that sense of background of knowing a bit about their neighbours.
We not only visited the historical past, but we also visited and explored the contemporary outlook of Presbyterianism, which is impossible to divorce from the history of Presbyterianism, their outlook, their culture, their set of principles, which are very important, and in reality these are the principles by which this community lives. And I think it's only by understanding the outlook and the culture of this community that we can start to work with each other.
The pastor was excellent. He was very, very good, and I love the actual building itself. There was a great feeling in there, and the exchange between the pastor and some of the audience was also educational, because some of the audience are either agnostic or atheist. What I loved about that, and what I love about what I've heard today from all the Presbyterian churches, is the amount of work that they're doing in the community for the underprivileged in relation to food banks and helping people with their ESA, DLA, whatever, because of the Tory cuts, what they're doing, and they are going out there and doing it. Not enough churches are doing that.
I am heartened by every contact I have with Presbyterianism. I start to see it as a much more progressive and radical force than I would have imagined it was, and that belief system that requires dialogue and debate, even with the individual and within their congregations, and their deference to the rights of man. So I'm very heartened by that, and I think there is a great potential within Presbyterianism, if through its own understanding, to reach conclusions that would be progressive.
There's that dissenting streak, there's that sense of every man basically being his own priest, that sense of individualism. And we visited the scene of the 59 revival in Kells, where you saw appreciated the introduction of evangelicalism, that sense of having a personal relationship with God, which is still a very, very important part of present-day Presbyterian identity. So there always is that sense that if you don't agree with what's going on, you have the right of dissent against it. And if you can't change inside the system, then there's nothing to stop you going down the road and reinventing the system or having a breakaway. And that's been inherent in Presbyterianism since day one, as it were. I think one of the fascinating things in the journey we've been on, and this is particularly, I found this being reciprocated by Presbyterians and them coming back to me, in that there's this sense, whenever they've talked to Republicans before, that everybody has sung off the same hymn sheet, and everybody has maybe conferred with a certain party website before they've actually spoken to them, and there's been no dissent. And one of the refreshing things on both sides is that you've had Presbyterians and Republicans sitting around the table, and every Republican has had a point of view, and quite often in conflict with Republicans sitting next to him, and quite often the Presbyterians are on a different hymn sheet in terms of individualism. And that commonality of dissenters, I think, is a richness. And that's been one of the treasures for me, is just actually people having the confidence to step outside the trenches of the party line or the traditional party view, whatever sort of thing, and find a new position and explore a new position and escape that tribal vantage point and have another perspective.
Well, I think there's inevitably certain tensions when you're introducing people who haven't met before, particularly from different sides. And well, let's face it, we've got to be realistic about this. There was a very brutal conflict in this part of the world for many years, so it's inevitable that there will be a certain uneasiness when people meet for the first time. And yes, there was some of that, but we dealt with it, we overcame it, and it's something that has to be factored in any other set of discussions that we have.
To engage with people who perceive themselves to be different or coming from a different perspective, you have to try and understand them. So this equips us all with some kind of an understanding.
In that sense, there was quite a bit of excitement and anticipation about it. And I think, yes, there was edgy, difficult conversations, but these conversations have to be had. But if you can have conversations where you begin to appreciate how you can accommodate people's viewpoint, and that's, I think, the big thing that needs to be grasped by Republicans in particular, a sense of it. You'll never persuade these people. The guns, the bombs and the troubles didn't persuade them. What you need to do is look in for ways to accommodate them.
This is the essence of these discussions, these meetings, these events, is that we have to adjust our outlook to accommodate others. Well, from the outset, something we learned was that it's eminently possible to sit and talk even about difficult issues with our Presbyterian neighbours, that it was an incredibly affable and friendly exchange of views.
So I think that's where Presbyterians now are, and I think Republicans are there as well, because we've found that in escaping that tribal vantage point and beginning to see some other person's point of view, you actually get another point of view yourself. And that's where a lot of the common ground is actually found, and that's where we have, as we've begun to call it, discussions amongst dissenters.